first speaker is Danette Boucher, who holds a BFA in theatre and acting and MMA in applied theatre, museum theatre, both from the University of Victoria and British Columbia, Canada. For 34 years, she's performed at and created and consulted for museums wishing to add performance to the public programming. She's a regular contributor to academic industry conferences. She's a playwright, dramaturge, an actor specializing in 19th century theatre. She's currently the writer-director for the Theatre Royal in the Lynn History Museum of Barkerville Historic Town and Park. Her academic research focuses on decolonization in colonial era museums, and the title of her paper is How Miss Florence Wilson Brought European-Style Theatre to the Cariboo Gold Rush, and how her influence continues to be felt in Barkerville, British Columbia, which I think is an absolutely wonderful title. So now the floor is yours. Thank you.
We're over here trying to figure out whether or not the slideshow is going to advance on its own. We're hoping it won't. Thank you so much for having me here, to all the organizers, for working so hard. This is my very first time in Spain. The time difference between where I live and here is 9 hours, so I am so tired. Really want to be sleeping right now. Well, I would rather be here. But I'm hoping that I will talk in an expedient enough way that I can do a tiny performance at the end to show you what I do in Canada. I am a museum theatre specialist, as you just heard. So I don't really operate in the academic milieu as much as all of you. My master's degree was in applied theatre, museum theatre. And so when I happened to have the call for papers come through my inbox and it said staging and restaging 19th century theatre, I thought that's almost exactly my job description. So, you know, I was lucky enough to be accepted to come and speak here, and I'm thrilled. I would like to begin by acknowledging that I am visiting you here from the shared ancestral unceded territories of the Secwepemc and Cow people. So many of you as academics will recognize that what I have just done is a land acknowledgement. Our wonderful keynote speaker from yesterday and I were talking about land acknowledgements at the coffee break this morning, because if you come to an academic conference anywhere in Canada, you will have land acknowledgements. If you come to a piece of theater, there will be a land acknowledgement before the performance. We are in a place of deep decolonization. Not all news stories reach across the ocean, but if you have heard a news story from where I'm from, in the recent past, you may have heard about 215 small graves discovered at Kamloops Indian Residential School. I grew up in Kamloops. So and that is a story that's only about 4 years old, 3 years old. So we are in a very specific place right now. And the reason I wanted to begin by speaking about that is because I want to talk to you today about Miss Florence Wilson, who is a character I have played in a museum called Barkerville for 30 years. And when we talk about women bringing theater to anywhere in the world, you know, we immediately start layering on all the implications that we just naturally have, that we've heard here at this conference. We know instinctively that it's hard to be a woman in theater. It's hard to be a woman in theater today. It was really hard to be a woman in theater in the 19th century. We know that it's wrapped in difficulty, it's wrapped in judgment and ageism and sexism. So Miss Wilson was a hero for bringing theater to the colony of British Columbia, but I also just want to make sure that I acknowledge that she was certainly part of the invasion of Indigenous land that we are now coping with so deeply in the land that I live in. So speaking of the land that I live in, oh, good, it worked. So where I'm from is the westernmost province of Canada, and it's called British Columbia. So it's the one that's closest to you here, the orange. Earlier, a wonderful speaker talked about Canada being formed in 1867, but British Columbia is formed in 1858 as a colony of England and then joins with Canada in 1871. British Columbia was initially the area, before it's called British Columbia, as a fur trading territory. And this is, of course, I'm speaking of after contact. But British Columbia itself is created because of gold. So here is a picture from a gold rush. So there's two big gold rushes that inform the creation of British Columbia. The first is the Fraser River Gold Rush, which leads to the Cariboo Gold Rush. So the Cariboo Gold Rush is really the second big international gold rush in the world. The first is the California Gold Rush. The second is Australia. The third is Cariboo, and that's right where I currently live. So when we look at this picture, obviously we see the obvious. There are no women in it. It's all men, because who came to gold rushes? Men came to gold rushes. I just got to get my phone here. So there is gold discovered in California. Once one gold rush starts to run out, everyone's just waiting for the whispers of the next one. And then everyone heads off to the Fraser River, and then they start following the Fraser and following the tributaries of the Fraser up into the mountains of Cariboo, and the Cariboo Gold Rush begins. In order to facilitate the gold rushes, boom towns spring up. So this is a picture of Barkerville. So this is a very, very traditional looking boom town. You can see the wooden boardwalks, and you feel like you're in a Hollywood Western. You can see the horses standing there in the middle of the street. You can see the signs at right angles pointing out all the men, a couple of dogs. This isn't the greatest angle, but if I could show it from a different angle, you would see that there are virtually no spaces between the buildings. They're right up against each other. Almost all of these boom towns are just there for a little while. They're made of wood. They rot away. Not very many survive. I'll put a pin in that because I'm going to talk about that a bit later. But this is Barkerville. And this is Miss Wilson. I swear to you, I had no idea what Victoria was going to talk about today, but Miss Wilson does travel to British Columbia with the with the London Female Immigration, Middle Class Immigration Society, which you referenced. So these are the only two known images we have of Florence Wilson. The first is a drawing from when she was 17 years old, and the second is a photograph that we believe is her that was taken in Barkerville. So Miss Wilson comes from a theatrical family in London, England. Her mother is Margaret Harris. She's a playwright and a composer. Her father is a barrister. Her brother is a director, and they are really good friends with Charles Dickens. They're not crazy wealthy, but they're comfortable. But as with many people, her story takes an unfortunate plot twist. When she's 17 years old, she starts writing for some of Charles Dickens' publications. She publishes a book of poetry. She's pretty happening, but her mother dies and her father goes bankrupt. And suddenly, her very comfortable life has ended. So she has to do something. So she goes to Russia to become a governess. And while she's working in Russia, there is some sort of family emergency and she has to get back to England. So she jumps on a ship, and the ship, she's in a shipwreck in Scandinavia, and she loses everything. So now she gets back to England and she's really, really desperate. And at the exact moment that she's really, really desperate, of course, the Crimean War has caused there to be a great surplus of unmarried women, and she's getting old. As we have heard by so many people's presentations, she is 39 when she leaves for British Columbia, which is impossibly ancient in terms of women at this time. And so she starts seeing all these ads for the colonies wanting women to come. There's a want of women, some of the advertisements say. And they're not just looking for women to come and marry men, they're looking for women to come and be of service, and they're looking for women to there's a terror that all these men who have come to these places to to search for gold and have built these towns can no way build a town that is civilized. You got to get some women over here. And so she travels aboard the Tynemouth, which has 60 young unmarried women. So that picture I just showed you is a picture from, how am I doing for time? Am I right? Yeah, from the Cariboo Amateur Dramatic Association. You know, since I've been in Valencia, I think I've taken 4,000 pictures. I've been here for 2 days, but this is the only known photo of the Cariboo Amateur Dramatic Association. I've probably spent, I don't know, months of my life just looking at it because it tells these beautiful stories. First of all, everything that you see in this picture, except for the wood and the rocks, came in on the backs of men and animals on the Cariboo Wagon Road, which is a really difficult road. There isn't even a road to Barkerville until 1865. The gold rush starts in 1860, so it takes a long time to get things in there. So everything you see, the paint for the backdrops, the costumes, everything is rare. I mean, these people really wanted theater. So Miss Wilson, Florence Wilson, and some of her friends start the Cariboo Amateur Dramatic Association. But not only that, she brings a trunkload of books to the Cariboo that is used to start the very first library in the colony of British Columbia. So she is a cultural force. They put on all sorts of plays. They write their own plays. They put on Shakespeare plays. They put on farces. They do regular benefits where if someone in the community isn't doing very well financially, they, you know, sort of do a cabaret or a coffee house and they make money for them. They do this in a saloon that they have purchased and named the Theatre Royal. My longer go stopped going on my notes. So this is what Barkerville looks like today. So Barkerville survives, and it is an open-air heritage museum in British Columbia. Oh, that's such a pretty picture. And here's how it looks a little bit closer to the ground. So I live in a very wintry place. For 8 months out of the year, it's covered in snow, but for the other months of the year, it's quite a vibrant museum that is visited by people around the world. Barkerville, I will say, immodestly, is considered to be a cutting-edge site when it comes to the use of theater to interpret history. And in Barkerville today, there is a recreation of the Theatre Royal. After the town burns down in 1868, it is rebuilt, and when it is rebuilt, they build themselves a proper theatre. Unfortunately, that theatre had to be torn down in the 1930s, so a community hall was restored to look almost exactly like the original one. This is the inside. We have no idea what the actual inside of the Theatre Royal looked like because we don't have any interior photos, and there's the outside of what it looks like today. On stage. So this is where it gets very theatrical because I play Florence Wilson. So I'm an actress playing an actress acting. So part of my job is we do a theater show every single day in Barkerville, and we play the characters from the Cariboo Amateur Dramatic Association. So we're all actors playing an actor acting. And that's just another one I threw in of the audience at the end, taking our pictures. But that's not all I do. I also do, we tell the stories out on the streets. We have all these different programs. So this is me doing what's called a town tour. And I'm talking about the town as Miss Wilson. So you might see me on the town tour in the morning, and then you might see me on the stage a little bit later. And within this program, I tell the story of the day that Barkerville burned down. So probably the reason, well, I mean, 99% of the reason that Barkerville stands, well, all those other wooden boom towns don't, is because it burns down in 1868 and is rebuilt better with fire prevention in mind. And really, truly, they made the street wire, put fire lanes in, did all of these things to try and keep Barkerville from burning down again. So in 1958, in the centennial of the colony of British Columbia, it is decided that the big thing that British Columbia is going to do is save this old gold mining town, which has just continued to exist. So that's how Barkerville looks right after the fire. There is another view of it, of everyone just standing there. And this is a picture of me telling the story of the fire in the exact spot where it happened. How much time do I get? I do? All right, all right. So then what I'll do is I'll come around here. So you have to imagine that I dress like that. And I'll just do that.
The summer of 1868 is hot and drought conditions exist throughout the colony of British Columbia. I cannot tell you with exact authority how the Great Fire starts because no one really knows for sure, but as these things go, right after the fire, a rumour begins to circulate, and it is passed from mouth to ear, and it is picked up and printed in the Cariboo Sentinel newspaper. Now here is what I can tell you for sure. The fire starts right here. And right here before the fire stands a saloon called Adler & Berry's New Fashioned Saloon. And this is one of the saloons along William Street that employs dancing girls. And the dancing girls in this gold rush are called hurdy-gurdy girls. Now it is said that on the afternoon of the 16th of September, 1868, one of these hurdy-gurdy girls is standing in the back room of Adler & Berry's. And she's ironing her skirt in preparation for an evening of dancing. Whether she's ironing the skirt, it does follow that she is standing there in some manner of underclothes. Now, it is said that there is a miner who is wandering around town this day. He's an absolute scoundrel. He's peeping in windows, and he peeps into the window of Adler & Berry's saloon, and he sees this young lady standing there indisposed, and he decides, as the Cariboo Sentinel puts it, that he is going to sneak in and steal a kiss. What a pretty Victorian way of saying he's going to assault her. He breaks into the saloon, he grabs the young lady, she's terrified. She begins to struggle with him, and within that struggle, they bump into the stove, which is lit. September is a cold month on William Street, and she's ironing, she's keeping her flat warm. When they bump into the stove, they upset the stovepipe. It falls off, sparks shoot straight up to the ceiling, and that ceiling is nothing more than a sheet of canvas which starts on fire easily. And then that fire spreads right through to the tinder-dried shake roof. Within minutes, Adler & Berry's is engulfed in flames. What luck! There is a wind still. And the wind is blowing from east to west, and the wind picks up sparks of Adler & Berry's fire, carries them over the road, and the first of those sparks alight on the rooftop of the Bank of British North America, roughly where the Barkerville stop stands upon your time. So now we've got a fire on either side of the street. The street is half as wide, and there are no spaces between the buildings. This fire is burning out of control. We have a small fire brigade in place, but they understand very quickly that they will not be able to stop this fire. This fire will burn itself out. Now, my saloon is upstream, so you might wonder, well, what is it that alerts you that something is very wrong on this end of town? Maybe it's the smell of the smoke. Barkerville always smells like smoke. Maybe it's the roar of the flames. I can't even hear it. What alerts me that something is very wrong is the sound of people's voices. Gold rushes are noisy places, but this is not the sound of celebration. This is the sound of fear. I come out of my saloon, I look down the boardwalk this way, and I see a wall of flame coming right on. The very first thing I think of to do is the same thing that most of my neighbours are already doing. I run right back into my saloon and I start gathering whatever I can manage. I make a little bag of my skirt, I put my things in it, I run as quickly as I can over to the bank of Williams Creek, and I allow everything to just drop out there. I realise I can make one more trip. I repeat all of that, but this time when I turn around, my saloon has gone. In 1 hour and 20 minutes, 116 buildings have burned to the ground. Evening begins to settle in, and we're all just standing there on the bank of the creek. If we're lucky, we've got some saved things around our feet, and we're just gazing back at a smouldering pile of ashes that a few hours before had been our town, and we start to make some very hard decisions. Some of us leave that very night. But more of us, we realize this is our home now. We want to stay. And so the very next morning, we begin rebuilding Barkerville. In 1 week, we've got 20 buildings. In 1 month, enough to see us through the winter, and the following spring, we complete the reconstruction of the town of Barkerville.
So I think that's all I have to say. I just really wanted to be able to give you a chance to see a way that some 19th century women's stories are being preserved through theater in museums. Thanks.
Thank you.
This amazing performance. We've been privileged spectators to the story being told today. So we've got time for questions and queries, comments from the floor. You've got one there.
Thank you. Danette, thank you for that. That was delightful. I'm just curious about what the sources are that are being used to construct that sort of wonderful descriptive narrative. In the first person, is there a diary that survives? Is that a pastiche of multiple individual experiences?
I'm so glad you asked that. So Florence needs very little writing, but as you know, archives are being digitized and things, we're learning more. But we have to take some license when we're doing this. Miss Wilson didn't leave any account of the fire. So I have read every account that I can. You probably have no way of knowing this, but maybe it hit the news over here. I've told that story for 30 years, but it wasn't until 2017 that the area that I live in burst into flames. And we've been the subject of terrible wildfires every summer ever since. So I actually went and talked to firefighters, and I talked to people who have been inside of fires to get details. Sometimes we're lucky enough to have a very strong account of what happened, but in this case, it's creative license based on reading everything I can get my hands on and just knowing the pieces of historical information I have are that her saloon burned down and she stayed. Everything else is based on research, as much research as I can about her and about what happened that day. We know everyone started running back into their buildings and getting their stuff. In this day and age, we all think real estate is the most important thing. And that day and age, they thought their stuff was the most important thing. So they got it out of their houses. So yeah, in this particular case, most of that particular story is me really trying to understand what happened to her.
Thanks for a great performance, Danette. I was just wondering if you could talk more about the Living Museum, sort of when was it founded, who's funding it, how many visitors and staff do you have, sort of essentially what's just the economic model which allows for such a fantastic bit of research and reconstruction to take place?
Well, like every museum, many museums in the world, we struggle. And also we have now this added layer of being a colonial era museum. So the one thing I didn't have time to touch on is the fact that over the last probably 5 years, one of the main objectives of Barkerville has been to introduce an Indigenous interpretation program and make it really the focus of our work. It's hard to get funding when you're a colonial era museum. Barkerville is owned by the province of British Columbia, and it is sort of funded by the province of British Columbia. But the funding is not adequate. So we also have to rely on people buying theater tickets and coming through the door. And we also lately have had to rely on corporate donations. So it's every single year, it's a little bit tenuous. One of the main reasons I've been going around trying to visit places like this is to bring a little more attention, because I think it's a really important museum. The visitation is we're just starting to recover from the pandemic, but you know, between 60 to 100,000 people will come in the summer. I don't remember the other one. Who asked one other thing, but that, yeah. So it's a museum that you know, it's not world renowned, but it's we are getting to be more recognized in the world for the work we are doing. We have a Chinese interpretation program and original peoples program, we call it, and some of the work that we're doing with our decolonization work is considered to be quite groundbreaking. Barkerville.ca.
Thank you, all three of you. Really great food for thought. I know this question is for you. I was wondering if Molly was fluent in English or if she traveled with an interpreter. If you said that, I'm sorry, I must have missed it.
She didn't bring any interpreter with her. She understood. She has studied English in Japan, so probably mostly she understood very well in English. Yeah, thank you for asking.
I have another question related to me. I was wondering if you knew anything about the Japanese dancer Michio Ito, and if Molly was affiliated with him at all. He was in London at the same time and performed with James Joyce.
Could you say the name?
Sorry. Was there a relationship with connection with Michio Ito?
Ito. Okay.
The dancer, because he was in London at the same time with James Joyce.
Yeah, that's right. So you asked me the connection between Marie and Ito Michio. Well, the period she was staying there was a different period actually. So she didn't have the actual contact with him in London, but many theater practitioners, Japanese theater practitioners, were living in London in the early 20th century, and most of them are men, including Michio. Yeah, thank you for asking.
Is there any other question? Yes, Kate.
I'm trying to formulate this because I think there's a really interesting thread between all three papers, and I suppose I'm struck by Vicky, your mention of the post-uprising, First War of Independence effect of Tom Taylor. Have you found evidence that he's writing specifically after the mutiny? Does he mention that anywhere? Is there, because I know, obviously it hits the newspapers, and there's this move then obviously to bring India, take it away from the East India Company and into British government. And I was also interested, sorry, this is a portfolio question. I was interested, Ayumi, in thinking about the fashion in early 20th century, late 19th century, the sort of the chinoiserie and Japan, the interest in the Japanese, and in a contrast to the interest in India, that relationship between Britain and Japan or China is not the same. It's not a colonial or imperial relationship. And I wondered whether you wanted to say a little bit more about that sort of cultural power, if you like. So, sorry, it's a portmanteau question to the two speakers. But I think there's a relationship.
Thanks for the question, Kate. I did, in fact, if I remember right, it's been a while ever since I read it. He gets inspiration from the mutiny for, I know that you don't like the word mutiny, but I'm using it, in the Overland Route, which is the other play that I did not work on this occasion, because they are traveling by boat, if I remember right, as well, and they have a shipwreck, and they talk about the consequences of the upbringing, and I know that the uprising, but not exactly. I haven't found evidence that he was reading about it and documenting himself, and that is perhaps why they say that he was not a reliable narrator. But I am sure that he was reading about it, because everyone was, right? But they do mention the mutiny, if I remember right, in the Overland Route. Thank you.
So as for the cultural power or balance between India, Japan, and Britain.
And Britain, because it's you tend to think in this notion of a colonial imperial.
Yeah, right.
But it doesn't.
Yeah,
not
probably. Yeah, it wouldn't be the case of Japan, maybe, because there was alliance between Britain and Japan from 1902. Right. So that's the reason why many Japanese went to stay in London and to absorb or to modernize Japanese society. So after returning to Japan, they tried to modernize by the knowledge of the Western culture. So probably the things are slightly different from those of the colonial context, maybe. Yeah.
Any further question or comment? No? So please join me and let's give them a great round of applause. It's been really good panel. Thank you. So just a reminder, we don't have the keynote and the program, so we'll meet for the performance. So this is going to be very exciting. Although this is set for 7, we're going to meet 6:30 there. And you've got 2 hours and a half, the house. So you can stretch your legs, so stroll around the city and have some kind of rest. Remember, you've got the ticket in the lanyard here for the performance. So thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you later, 6:30 in the Cultural Center. You've got the address at the bottom of the program. I don't need any further instruction, just let us